You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is radical radio, and that means more than just alternative current affairs and political coverage.
We're radical because we're an independent media outlet, owned and operated by the community.
We're radical because we give communities the control of their own shows, with their own music, in their own languages.
We're radical because we provide a media platform for communities to build their own power to create social change.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call us on 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
My name is Joseph Toscano. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. The program is podcast. There are thousands of podcasts you can access. You go to 3cr.org.au, Anarchist World This Week, and hey presto, it's there. I'd like to thank all those people across Australia and all those community radio stations which broadcast the Anarchist World this week. So it's good to see, and if you do miss it, and you live in Melbourne, the program is rebroadcast, I hate to say this, at 5 a.m. on Friday morning, but that's the way it is when you get a second bite at the cherry. Now, I've got a little phrase which I keep in the back of my head. During the darkest days, we need to cling on to hope, the love child of desire and expectation. The desire for change and the expectation that change will occur. And we are in a dark period of human history. And what I'll try to do today, and the key word is try, is actually tie up all these loose ends and maybe highlight why I think it's such a dark day, or the days ahead of us are going to be difficult. See, and the problem about being an activist, especially political activism, is that it's a long, hard struggle, and in many regards with few wins. And when you do get a win, you find everybody else in authority jumping on the bandwagon, telling us it was all due to their efforts. So, clinging on to hope, as I said, the desire of the love child of a desire and expectation. That's what hope is. Desire for change, the expectation that change will occur, whether it's personal change, political change, cultural change. That's what hope is about. So if you lose that and you become cynical and think nothing will ever change, you have done the work for those who exercise power and hold wealth. Because that's what they want us to think. They want us to think that change is impossible. There is no other way. They want us to be cynical. They want us to withdraw from the political process and leave it up to them. They want us to stay on the margins, sit on the sidelines. And the important thing to remember during this period is that it's individuals who have sparked that fire of resistance and rebellions. And when those individuals join together, that is when we see the great social movements which have been created by people to make significant changes in the societies they live in. And I keep saying, anarchos, from which the word anarchy is derived, means without rulers. So the anarchist struggle is not the struggle, it's a struggle to live a life without rulers. Not without rules, but without rulers. And what gives rulers the ability to determine the lives of hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of people? It's inequalities in power and wealth. And what we've seen during the last 50 years, the last half a century, during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, revolution, tsunami which was swept over the world, we have seen power and wealth concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. All right, let's start off with the CFMEU pylon. See, that's the great thing about living in the 21st century. The great pylon. How instantaneously we see this great pylon. Now, a news organisation did its investigation and claims there's corruption in the construction branch of the CFMEU, especially the Victorian branch and the New South Wales branch. Okay? Now, all of a sudden, every Tom, Dick and Harry, Martha and Maud has jumped on the CFMEU, telling us what a horrible, horrible, corrupt, evil, nasty, monstrous organisation it is. Bullying, that's a good word, isn't it, these days? Bullying. As if being denied the basic access of life is not bullying. So they've all piled on. It's the Prime Minister, even the trade union movement itself, the corporate-owned media, the government-gelded ABC, the virtual platforms. It's kick a construction worker day. Kick the CFMEU. Now, I'm not saying there isn't corruption in the CFMEU. There's corruption in most human organisations, but the dilemma is the CFMEU is the survivor of a long struggle to destroy the trade union movement. And this is just the latest volley in that campaign to destroy, criminalise, marginalise people coming together to protect their interests. Now, I can tell you a little story. In 1971, I was standing 100 metres from this studio at the corner of Victoria Parade and Smith Street, in Collingwood, Fitzroy. I was about 19 or 20. I had my shorts on, shirt, some shoes, could even been thongs. And I'm waiting for a truck to turn up. And on this corner, there's about 50 men and boys. The truck turns up. Somebody at the back of the truck says, you. We jump on the truck. We're taken to a building site. No protective equipment, nothing. We work our butt off, and at the end of the day, we're given some cash, and that's it. That was what the construction industry was like in 1970 around this country. That's when the Builders Labourers Federation began to understand that you needed to take direct action in order to improve the conditions of its members. But unlike the 21st century CFMEU, the Builders Labourers Federation, especially in New South Wales and to some extent in Victoria, understood that if trade unionism was to prosper and working people were to prosper, they needed to make alliances with people outside the trade union movement. And we saw the creation of the Green Bands movement, which has had such extraordinary ramifications for society. Two simple examples in Victoria. One, the Rialto Theatre is there because of Green Band. Two, that little triangle, little circle in Ballarat, Bakery Hill, where the Eureka flag was first flown in 1854, on the 29th of November 1854, is there because of a CFMEU Green Band against McDonald's. And obviously, what's happened with the tightening of legislation, which has basically outlawed industrial and workplace activity in this country, and with legislation which has promoted individual contracts, subcontractors, and grossly restricted the ability of trade unions to agitate for their members, what we've seen is a rapid decline in trade union membership. We've seen the inability of trade unionists in this country to withdraw their labour during any dispute, except during an enterprise bargaining agreement period after you've jumped through about 15 hoops. We've seen the criminalisation of picket lines. We've seen occupations now, people involved in occupations could be jailed for up to 25 years. I'm not making this up. Look up the legislation. I mean, you think I'm making it up, but I'm not. So in the construction industry especially, using strong-arm tactics, using bikie gangs or criminal elements to maintain the position you find yourself in is not something new. I could name a number of corporations who quite large corporations involved in this industry who have over the last 40 years employed strong-arm tactics, which have included the wholesale employment of bikie gangs and criminal elements to protect their private interests. So obviously in a situation where the trade union movement has almost been hounded out of existence, people will do what has to be done in order to survive as an organisation. Now, what I described in 1971, almost 45 years ago, compared to today, it's over 50 years ago, to today, is chalk and cheese. And I find it really, really disgusting when people, complain. The people on construction sites, which are covered by the CFMEU, are getting paid good money. And that somehow this is a criminal offence. When we see CEOs, like the former boss of Qantas, take home a $20 million bonus on top of their everything else. Just extraordinary, the double standards. Look at the financial crisis, 2008. Anybody charged? No. Look at the robo-debt fiasco. That wasn't just unethical, immoral behaviour. That was illegal behaviour. Any politicians suffer? No. Any bureaucrats suffer? No. Look at the Banking Royal Commission and the disgusting things which were found out about the Banking Royal Commission and the financial institutions in this country. Was anybody charged? No. Look at the aged care sector and the disgusting situation the privately owned aged care sector found itself in. And the not fit for purpose recommendations which were made by the Royal Commission, which talked about the private aged care sector as an organisation not fit for purpose. Anybody charged? No. Look at the situation where private corporations have now been tender to provide public service and the way these private corporations rip off the system ad nauseum. Anybody charged? No. Any pile-on by the corporate-owned media and the government-gelded ABC and the virtual platforms? No. Talk about corruption in the CFMEU. Pile-on, pile-on, pile-on. That's the type of society we've become in 2024. Because for far too long we've accepted the maxim that the only thing that is important is to increase profits for that small section of society that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. And every time somebody tries to saw a leg off the corporate table, this is what we get. Think about it. Maybe there'll be a Royal Commission, another Royal Commission to the CFMEU like there was 10 years ago. I mean, you can have immoral behaviour, unethical behaviour, but the question is it criminal behaviour under the law? And more importantly, the CFMEU has gone off the wrong track, in my opinion, in the last decades or two. In order to protect its ability to function because of all the legislation that's been passed to criminalise its members, it has forgotten the community around it. And when we approached them here in Victoria to assist us with the Barrack Beacon estate public house evictions, they weren't interested in putting a green ban. And I think if trade unions want to become relevant again in 2024, they need to convince their members that it's not just about job safety and about wages and conditions, it's much more. It's about them being part and parcel of a wider community. And by using their industrial might, what's left of it, and muscle, they can assist the wider community to ensure the rights and privileges that they have today are not eroded further. You listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Let's move on. Now look, I've never been in the United States and I'm not interested in ever going, okay? To me it's a dysfunctional society, the land of the brave and the free. But I am very concerned, not about what's happening in the United States, that's their problem. Obviously it has ramifications for the rest of the world and especially us. But ultimately it's their problem. What I say is really not going to have any impact on what happens in the United States of America. Not that it has much impact on what happens in Australia. But isn't it time that we started in Australia to think about having an independent foreign policy? That's right. Did you hear that word? Independent foreign policy. Currently, we are, the United States and America, warts and all, we are its proxy in this part of the world. We have US foreign bases on Australian soil which have been here for decades. We have an increasing number of US troops in this country. And we now have a weapons system which is theoretically designed to protect us as a country from foreign invasion, which is totally interlinked with the US military-industrial complex. So we have no independence in determining foreign policy. So if you're concerned about what will happen in the US of A in the next few months, if you're concerned about those ramifications worldwide, if you're concerned of us being dragged into another unnecessary war like Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan in order to pay a policy, to have Big Brother protect us, when Big Brother is only interested in Big Brother, well, isn't it time that as a nation we began to discuss an independent foreign policy, a foreign policy which is independent of US interests? Because if you think that the only barrier between us and oblivion is the United States, think again. The United States, as we've seen and consistently see, is only interested in the United States. Do I blame them for that? No. They're not particularly interested in us. The only reason they're interested in us is because it helps them promote their worldwide control. Now, I know everybody's excited about the Chinese, especially now they've given $30 million to the Solomon government to help them with their budget concerns. But let's not forget, the United States has over 850 bases, military bases outside its borders which protect its interests. Russia's about 25. Guess how many China has? 1 in Djibouti. That's right. But the beauty about the 21st century, and especially 2024, is we are no longer isolated. We are no longer physically isolated from the rest of the world. If push comes to shove and there is a major confrontation between China and Russia and whatever in the USA, we are in the firing line. Pure and simple. Pure and simple. We are in the firing line. So why should we, as a people, as a sovereign nation state, walk lockstep with a country which has no interest in us as a people? Its only interest is our ability, to promote and protect their interests. For example, let's not forget the United States' history in South America over the last 50 years, the number of coups, assassinations, murders they've been involved in. Let's not forget the 2 million Indonesians which were killed in the mid-1960s with US support when the Suharto regime came to power. Let's not forget what's happened in West Papua. The key to survival is we do not live off the east coast or the west coast of the United States. We live here in the southern hemisphere. Our neighbours are the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Pacific Islands, New Guinea, West Papua. They're our neighbours. These are the people we should be creating an independent foreign policy with, not relying on, Uncle Tom to look after us if push comes to shove, because Uncle Tom does not look after its allies. Look what happened in Afghanistan. Look what happened in Vietnam. Look what happened in Iraq. Look what happened in the struggle against ISIS, when the very organisations which shed blood to bring ISIS to a standstill are the very organisations which were deserted by the United States of America when they'd done their job in North and East Syria. So the list goes on and on. The time has come for discussion about an independent foreign policy. Think about it, because the cost to us as a people will be immeasurable if we don't think about and ultimately pursue a US foreign policy free of US intervention. Listening to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Well, you wonder, how can God and the US Supreme Court be wrong? Can God be wrong? Can the US Supreme Court be wrong? Well, you may have noticed the attempted assassination of Mr. Trump over the last 48 hours. Maybe a bit difficult not to have noticed, considering the blanket coverage. Well, we ignore what's going on at Gaza, but that's a different story. And Mr. Trump said that possibly God was on his side. Who knows? Now, if God's on his side, I wonder what the Israelis think, because they think God's on their side, and the Iranians what they think, because they think God's on their side. Everybody thinks that God's on their side. I feel sorry for God. God doesn't give a shit. He or she's not on anybody's side. But then you've got the US Supreme Court, which has, said that the United States President can do what he likes. Can do what he likes. Now, I'm not going to make any jokes about the attempted assassination of Mr. Trump, because it does have ramifications, and we'll talk about that later on. But I am interested in what type of society the United States is going to become if, and most likely when, Mr. Trump is elected as president for a second term. Because I'm interested in what happened, over 4 years ago. And I know the United States is a problem. They've got to elect between a living cadaver, Mr. Biden. They've got to select a living cadaver, Mr. Biden, or they've got to select, a buffoon, Mr. Trump. He really doesn't understand what the truth is, but that doesn't matter. No great leader, I should say, no great authoritarian has ever worried about the truth. You create your own delusional kind of world. But the problem is, remember the COVID-19 pandemic? When over 1 million Americans died? At least 80% of them needlessly, because of the Trump's administration's inability to actually consider COVID-19 to be an issue of any concern. 1 million. 1 million Americans died. Look at the situation in Afghanistan. Although Biden did the final pullout, let's not forget that Mr. Trump was the gentleman who was able to encourage the Taliban to come to a negotiated position which allowed the Taliban to walk in to Kabul almost unopposed. Then look at the fossil fuel industry. When we have a potential government that has no interest in decreasing greenhouse emissions. And then look at the way foreign policy was conducted. Now, obviously what America does is their business. But I am concerned of what happens when they carry that business outside their borders. Look at the situation of Mr. Assange. So the fact is that we walk lockstep with them. We are in a three-legged race with them. And I can imagine people in government in this country being a little bit concerned of what direction the US of A will take in the near future. Because think about it. Now, I've never heard of Tenacious, but they tell me they're a great band. Now, one of the members of this duo, was asked on during a concert, one of their concerts here in Australia, what would he like for a birthday present, because it was his birthday, and he said, he's made a joke about Trump, them not missing next time, and guess what? The whole concert series in Australia has been cancelled. And their future in the USA has been cancelled. This is the new cancel culture. Think about it. This is what happens when you have authoritarian movements putting their faith in one human being. We saw it in Nazi Germany. We saw it in Pol Pot's Cambodia. We saw it in Stalin's Russia. We see it in China, with the Communist Party controlling all aspects of China. And this is the very issue that we face today in 2024. is the concentration of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands. That is the issue. But as an authoritarian movement grows and it captures the organs of state power, it then uses those organs to destroy any opposition. And if a band like Tenacious D feels so threatened after making an off-the-cuff remark at a concert, one of their concerts, they've cancelled their whole tour and any future touring, you begin to understand the nature of authoritarian movements. And when the US Supreme Court says that a president has total immunity under the US Constitution, you begin to understand how things can change so dramatically, so rapidly. So why do we find ourselves in this situation in 2024, where more and more people around the world are looking for authoritarian solutions to their problems? Because what we've seen in the Western world is the total failure of parliamentary democracy. Total failure. Now, obviously, people are not going to continue to support a system that has failed them. I mean, democracy in its simplest terms means the greatest good for the greatest number. But over the last 50 years, during the deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation phase that the world has gone through, what we've seen is the parliamentary system usurped, taken over by a small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, so that parliamentary democracy in the 21st century has become the greatest good, not for the greatest number, but the greatest good for the least number, the fewer number, whatever you want to say. So when people see that their livelihoods are threatened, when people see that anything they do doesn't really make much difference to their situation, when people see the very institutions and organisations in a parliamentary democracy that have been established to ensure the greatest good goes to the greatest number, when they see that this has been totally subverted, and all you've got to do to see this is look at every available statistical indicator. That's right, every available statistical indicator where wealth and power have been subverted in the parliamentary democracies. At least in a dictatorship, you know what the boundaries are. If you cross those boundaries, woe be you. You'll either be executed or jailed. In a parliamentary democracy, they keep telling us, you vote them in, they'll do the right thing by you. So what we see in the 2024, or the 21st century, the first quarter of a century of the 21st century, is the total failure of parliamentary democracy to provide for the people they represent. And that's why people turn to simple solutions, strong leaders who somehow can wave a wand and resolve their issues. But if you listen to Mr. Trump and his entourage, it's not about, decentralising power. It's not about sharing wealth. It's about exercising power over millions and using that country's institutions to ensure that any opposition which exists is brushed aside, is criminalised. And all you've got to do is look back less than 100 years at what happened in Western Europe. This isn't a new phenomenon. Remember the Ides of March when Julius Caesar was knifed to death by the Senate, or members of the Senate. He was knifed to death by members of the Senate because he wanted to set himself up as a supreme dictator. Obviously, emperors after him became supreme dictators in the Roman Empire. But the fact is that this desire to exercise power and centralise power in a minority of hands is a thing that anarchists have been fighting for centuries, if not thousands of years. Because it's when you give power, whether you give it or whether they seize power, and the courts and the armed forces and the police and the institutional structures become part and parcel of that ruling elite's power base. That's when you see the atrocities that occur on a mass scale. I mean, the atrocities that occurred in Nazi Germany, the atrocity that occurred in Stalin's Russia, the atrocities that occurred in Pol Pot's Cambodia, the atrocities that occurred in Mussolini's Italy, could not have occurred if power had not been centralised in a small clique or a small group of people. And that's what anarchists have been fighting against. We have been fighting for the decentralisation of power. So these atrocities, which are part and parcel of human history, which occur and reoccur and occur and reoccur with monotonous regularity, no longer occur. And if parliamentary democracy cannot deliver the goods, then democracy as a concept is dead. And we will see the rise of authoritarian figures who claim they can resolve people's problems by us giving them power. And that's what we see in Western Europe, that's what we see in England, that's what we see everywhere. And the fact is that the growth of authoritarianism in Western democracies is intrinsically linked to the failures of parliamentary democracy, which was created to provide the maximum benefit to the maximum number of people. And in 2024, what we've seen is this concept turned on its head. And it's been turned on its head because somehow, as a population, we have been convinced there is no other way. We have been convinced that the public is bad, the public enterprise is bad, private is good, that private investment for private profit is the only mantra that we should be following. It is a critical juncture in human history. It's an important juncture in human history because over 70% of the world's population is now being ruled by leaders, some self-appointed, some elected, who have concentrated power in their hands and can make extraordinary impacts on the communities that they rule. So it is a difficult time in human history. I said at the beginning of the program, it is a time to cling to hope. The love child, desire and expectation, the desire that change will occur, and the expectation, the desire that change will occur and the expectation it's going to occur, That's what we're looking at. A difficult time in human history. It's not a new time. We've repeated it as a humanity time and time and time again. What people have forgotten is that once the authoritarian leader can no longer provide for the basic necessity of people, then you have the growth of revolt and revolution. And that's what we're on the cusp of. Not today, not tomorrow, but possibly the next few decades. We're on the cusp of major change because, you see, it doesn't matter what delusions you have and I have. I could believe that God lives, on Mount Etna in Sicily, right? I could believe anything I like, but reality tends to bring us to earth. The reality of climate change, the reality of increasing violence, the reality of increasing control. That reality, it's what shapes the future and shapes our destiny, not only as a sovereign nation state, but our destiny as part of the human race on planet Earth. I know it sounds grandiose, but the fact is that we are at a critical juncture in human history. We ignore reality, elect or allow self-appointed leaders to control every facet of our existence, or we resist this change, irrespective of whether we are a minuscule minority or not. Because change comes when people are willing to stand up for that struggle. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, I know there are some people in society that think the United Nations wants to control the world. Well, look, we saw the United Nations Security Council pass a resolution, and that's almost impossible, regarding Gaza and ending the conflict in Gaza. And months later, what's happened? The carnage continues. The brutality, the excesses continues. And people continue to use words like war. There's no war in Gaza. You've got a highly military-industrial complex supported by the USA, right? That's the Israeli government, continuing to send bombs to Israel, who've got a significant air force, a significant navy, nuclear bombs in the back room, significant armaments, right, against an enclave of 2 million people, half the size of Melbourne, half the size of Sydney, who've now suffered the humiliation and degradation as well as mass murder over the last 9 months, while the world shrugs its shoulders. I mean, the world shrugs its shoulders. Now, I can assure you that if this had occurred in any part of the world, the West wouldn't be shrugging its shoulders. We see it in Ukraine, although no Western countries have come to the aid of Ukraine in terms of putting troops in the Ukraine against the Russian invasion. We see billions of dollars of weapons and training going to the Ukraine, to help them resist the Russian invasion. But what do we see in Gaza? We don't even see enough food or water trickling into this enclave 9 months after the carnage began. We think that the Palestinians' dilemma began on the 7th of October 2023 when they broke out of Gaza and committed atrocities in southern Israel. Nobody talks about the 70-year history, the fact they'd been under a blockade since 2016, the humiliation, the daily degradations and humiliations of people in Gaza, the fact that in the West Bank their land continues to be taken by people who think that God gave them that land. And the carnage continues. It's not a war. It's a massacre. Over 40,000 people have been killed. Now, I understand the Israeli authorities or the Israeli armed forces said 14,000 of them were combatants. I find that hard to believe when I see the number of body bags of little kiddies, hospitals being razed to the ground. And the carnage continues. And we worry about somebody taking a pot shot at Mr. Trump. That seems to be the main point of discussion as far as the Australian media is concerned. Or the pile-on, it just goes on and on. So, obviously you and I we can raise the issue, we can knock on politicians' doors, but ultimately what happens in Gaza doesn't depend on us. Ultimately, it will be dependent on the amount of pressure which is brought on the United States to pull back its dog, Israeli armed forces in Gaza. Just extraordinary situation. This makes the Islamic State invasion into southern Iraq pale into comparison in terms of the brutality and inhumanity of what's occurring. It makes the Taliban's efforts in Afghanistan pale into insignificance. And this carnage is being conducted by our allies and to a lesser extent the government of this country. You're listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. But I've got some good news. You got to have good news. And I'm not talking about hope, the love child desire and expectation, the desire for change and the expectation that change will occur. Our king is coming to this country. That's right. Your king, my king, under the Australian Constitution, and all those wonderful Governor-Generals all over the country, one in each state. I don't know if they have one in the territories. I don't think they do, no. And one in Canberra. The king and his consort are coming to Australia to bless us. It's good to see. I'm excited. I'm very excited. I don't know which part of the British flag I'm going to wave. I think I'll wave just the English part, the red cross on the white background, the St. George's flag. I don't want to wave that horrible Welsh thing with that dragon and that horrible green, blue thing, the Scottish flag, because both of those minorities are a little bit uppity at the minute. But I'll have my English flag there. And I'll be waving to our king, and I'll be showing him the respect he deserves. What a wonderful day. Louis Armstrong, eat your heart out. What a wonderful day. King Charles is coming to Australia and we're paying for the privilege. I'm so humbled, and I hope you bastards out there show the same respect I'm showing for the king, because I know you Republican bastards out there want an Australian head of state. I mean, you people need to have your heads read. When we've got a king and his consort coming, we need to do what generations of Australians have done since before Federation. They've got on their hands and knees and worshipped our master. Yep. The thing is, soon we'll be able to worship two masters. Our king, who's basically a figurehead, and Mr. Trump, who will have extraordinary powers at his fingertips once again. That's the great thing about being alive in Australia in 2024. Now, look, I could go on about different issues as I've done over the last, 46, 47 years on this program. I could go on till the cows come home. I could talk under wet concrete. I can't anymore. But the fact is that things have gone backwards, and things will continue to go backwards. We now have two generations of Australians which are saddled with an extraordinary debt for accessing higher education. We have two generations of Australians who will never be able to own a home and have the security that home ownership provides to individuals because of the rorting of the private housing market and the death of public housing, which provided competition. In 2024, as I keep saying on this program, we are enjoying the benefits of privatisation. And what are those benefits? Increasing power prices for electricity and gas, increasing out-of-pocket healthcare costs, increasing costs for public education. As I keep saying almost every week, when you've got a private charity raising money to send Aussie kids to public schools, you begin to understand there's a problem. When you see the gap between rich and poor increasing exponentially every week, when you hear people carrying on about the wages construction workers who are members of the CFMEU receive while not making a comment on the wages senior bureaucrats and, corporations pay their CEOs and their senior bureaucrats, you begin to wonder what type of world you live in. When you see the pile on the CFMEU because of allegations of possible corrupt behaviour, you begin to understand what type of society we live in. When you see every Tom, Dick and Harry, Maud and Henrietta carry on about the criminal activities of the CFMEU, when you don't hear a peep out of them regarding the criminal activities of this country's financial sector, the criminal activities regarding this country's aged care sector, the criminal activities of this country's NDIS sector, and the list goes on and on, you begin to understand that we are in a topsy-turvy world where black is white and white is black. And when you see people, spout the most ridiculous opinions which, kind of make reality a disposable extra in our thinking, you begin to think, are we going back to those wonderful days in the Middle Ages where we could burn witches and we could sacrifice ourselves on the altar of a great leader for the good of the country? Obviously, I'm waiting for the king. I'm getting ready. I'm learning to bow to His Majesty, or the Majesty, Her Majesty, His Highness, Her Highness. But ultimately, he's just a little sideshow. Real power doesn't lie in Parliament. It lies in the hands of a shrinking number of people who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication in this country, who are doing everything possible, including the promotion of authoritarian solutions to the problems we have in this country, in order to maximise their profits at the expense of each and every one of us. Thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. My name's Joseph Toscano. A few YouTube channels, Public Interest Before Corporate Interests, josephtoscano.nam, that's a YouTube channel that looks at the presentations I've been making over the past 7 or 8 months regarding how the Australian penal transport system was used as a mechanism by which to control dissent in the British Empire. And those of you who are interested, you can have a look at that. There's Facebook pages, Joseph Toscano. There's other Facebook pages you can get to. There's YouTube channel, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest, PIBCI, P-I-B-C-I. There's PIBCI, PIBCI.net. You can always join Public Interest Before Corporate Interest to try to put the future of the many before the profits of the few. Because we are at a critical juncture in Australia, in world history. And we seem to be repeating the mistakes of the past because somehow we have forgotten that the issues we face we face because of the centralisation of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands, when the institutions that we've created to provide the most, to look after the people in our society have failed us, it's time to look at other institutions which are based on direct democratic principles. Thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. That's streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Okay. All right, we're waiting to be relieved of our task to continue broadcasting on the Community Radio Network. It's time. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. We're about to disappear into the ether. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station.
Destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to The Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.